Hello friends of Oak Hills, this is Pastor Dale coming to you for our weekly video Touchpoint. Today is Thursday, October 13th, 2022. For our Points to Ponder article this week, we return to the big story of the Bible. We're now on chapter 6, and this chapter is titled Unfaithfulness. Have you ever imagined being the father in the parable of the prodigal son from Luke 15? You have two sons. One of them comes to you and says he wants out. He has had enough of the family living and wants freedom. You have only loved him, cared for him, and provided for him. If he would only remain with you, he would be set for life. But he rejects all that by demanding his portion of the inheritance so he can be free. Once he leaves, you look for any sort of update that a traveler may have about your prodigal son. You pray daily for his return. You grieve over him when you learn of his promiscuous living. You become anxious when you hear he is financially destitute. You continue to pray and you hope he would return, broken from his experiences. This is the story of God with Old Testament Israel. He gives them everything to be blessed and to be a blessing. A covenant, a people, land, and now a king. Not to mention the promises of the one to come. Yet time after time, Israel wants out. They want to worship idols according to their own imaginations. They want to be like the other nations with multiple gods. They believe the lie that God is withholding blessings from them. God does not look for updates about how Israel is doing, but he actively sends his prophets to warn Israel of their crash course with destruction. This is chapter 6 in the big story of the Bible, unfaithfulness. In chapter 5, we saw God give Israel yet another blessing, a king who is the foreshadow and ancestor of the promised one. David and his son Solomon enjoyed great peace and prosperity. That all comes to an end when Solomon's heart wanders. 1 Kings 11, verse 1 and 4 says, "Now King Solomon loved many foreign women. When Solomon was old, his wives turned his heart after other gods, and his heart was not wholly true to the Lord his God. Solomon and all Israel with him became just like the prodigal son." The rest of 1st and 2nd Kings is the sad story of a people chasing the pleasures of the world, rejecting a God who patiently calls them to return. Their unfaithfulness led to the division of the kingdom. Some lead the people in repentance to come back, like Hezekiah and Josiah. But in the end, Israel and Judah continue to spiral further and further away from God. When we hear the parable of the prodigal son in Luke 15, we often think of ourselves and our own wayward hearts. This is appropriate. Perhaps, though, Jesus had Old Testament Israel in mind when he gave this parable. He is responding to the critique and grumbling of the Pharisees and scribes that we read about in verse 2. He reminds them of their heritage, their past. Israel was just as wayward as the prodigal son. And now he warns them that they are becoming just like the older son, scorning the grace and generosity of the father. The point of this chapter in the big story of the Bible, unfaithfulness, is that we too either doubt the goodness of our Father or scorn his grace. We either believe God withholds blessing from us, or we are convinced we have earned our spot in his favor. These are the two paths of unfaithfulness to the Father. Israel's history and the parable of the prodigal son warn us of the dead-end pursuit of pleasure and blessing apart from God. The warnings of the Old Testament prophets, first given to unfaithful Israel, serve us as well as warnings against running away from God. A couple highlights to touch on this week in the life of Oak Hills. As always, we encourage you to be praying for our missionaries of the month. We are praying for Ben and Julie Jensen, serving with a church planting team in Nagoya, Japan with Mission to the World. So please be praying for them and their ministry there. They just returned about 4 or 5 months ago to Japan after a long break because of the pandemic. And so they are still continuing to adjust. Their children are adjusting. So pray for their ministry there. Secondly, on Saturday, October 29th, we are hosting our annual harvest party. We are excited about this opportunity to fellowship with our church family and also serve our community. And so we ask of you several things. First, have it on your calendar and plan to be with us. Secondly, if you are able to contribute to the party to make it extra rich and fun by either providing a pot of chili or providing a trunk for our trunk or treat, or even providing some extra sides to fill out the meal, we'd appreciate that. You could contact Pastor John and let him know. And then thirdly, we ask you to be inviting friends. Let your neighbors, co-workers, those near you, and say, hey, come join us at our church for a great opportunity for fellowship. It's going to be a blast. It's going to be a fun night. And pray for our efforts as we seek to invite our neighbors and those in our community to join us. Pray that God would open up doors there. And when you are there, this is perhaps the fourth thing we ask of you, when you are there, be looking for faces that you're not familiar with and welcome them and greet them and love on them and care for them. So that we're looking forward to that harvest party on October 29th. The third highlight here, we have a special men's gathering on Monday, October 24th at Stu Terry's home. These gatherings happen periodically as a way for the men of the church to gather, to pray for one another, to encourage and exhort one another, to remain faithful to Christ. And so I encourage you to be there, as well as enjoy great food and fellowship together. And then fourthly, I am out of town this weekend. I will be traveling up to the Chicagoland area and staying with my father. I haven't had a chance to see him since Christmas, so it's a chance to visit with my dad. But I'm also using this weekend as a study leave. I have an opportunity every year to use a study leave, and this week I'm using it to prepare for a couple sermon series that I will return to. We have finished the book of Daniel, and so I will return and be preaching a series on money and God's instructions to us about our use of money. But I also will be preparing a sermon series on the prophet Micah that we will be looking at through the Christmas season. So I appreciate your prayer for me and that study time. I look forward to the quietness of being away and the focus on some good, rich study, and also catching up and visiting with my father. I'll be praying for you, and I'll be praying for Pastor John, and as he leads us in the next part of his series in the book of Ecclesiastes. I always enjoy John's contributions there in our church. So I'll be praying for you. Please be praying for me. Thanks for joining me this week for Touchpoint. We look forward to seeing you at some point soon.